This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue to cover the Trump administration's move to indefinitely jail migrant children and their families, we're speaking to Oregon Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley. In June of 2018, the senator made headlines after he was barred from entering a former Walmart in Brownsville, Texas, where the government was jailing about 1,500 children. Operators of the Southwest Key facility called the police on the U.S. senator.
I haven't actually leave the property, but I'm guessing that's about what's to happen.
Yeah, sir, I think that's what they're going towards. What was your name again, sir? I'm sorry, Senator?
Senator Jeff Merkley.
Jeff?
U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley.
Merkley.
Yes.
How do you spell it, sir? I don't want to misspell it.
Yes, M-E-R.
M-E-R.
Yeah, M-E-R. M-E-R.
Yeah.
K-L-E-Y.
K-L-E-Y?
Yeah.
And your
yeah.
date of birth, sir?
Yeah, it's October 24th.
October
24th, 1956.
1956. And you said you were senator?
I'm a U.S. Senator.
Okay, sir.
Yes, and U.S. policy is involved right now with children. Are you familiar with this policy?
No, negative. Actually, this is not something that we specifically deal with. Okay. You know what I'm saying? But it was just so I can idea and just go and advise my sergeant that you're here.
Well, we won't take up their time anymore. But I think it's important for you all to be aware that it's been in the press all over the country that the children who were previously kept with their families under a new policy just implemented by the Attorney General are being separated from their families and warehoused here.
So that's Jeff Merkley trying to investigate a facility that's jailed 1,500 children. This is in Brownsville, Texas. It's the local Walmart. Explain why you went there and what happened, Senator.
Well, just hours before this, I had gone to a CBP, Customs and Border Protection processing center, and to my knowledge, I'm the first member of Congress who was in and then witnessed that children were, in fact, being separated from their parents and put into these big chain link cages in a warehouse. I was absolutely stunned by the experience. The press had not been in there. It was the consequence of Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump's I call it zero humanity. They called it zero tolerance policy. It was a strategy of inflicting pain on children in order to deter immigration. And I heard from activists that many of these children had been stuffed into this former Walmart up in Brownsville. And I had asked for permission to go and been turned away in advance. And I thought, well, I'll go knock on their door anyway, because if it really has hundreds of children, they have a lot of people working there. Maybe the supervisor will show me around. So as you witnessed there, I knocked on the door and actually called up the supervisor from outside on my cell phone. And I was told by the assistant that he would come out and talk to me. And he didn't come. And I called back and, oh, yeah, he's coming. He was waiting for the police to arrive. When I saw the police cars arriving, I thought, OK, this is going to get interesting. I've never been handcuffed. I've never been slammed to the ground, but it may be about to happen. It didn't. They were actually the police were fairly gracious. But the point was that the administration did not want anyone, even members of Congress, to see what was going on. They didn't want the press in. Because of that event, the press did get in, and 2 weeks later, I led a congressional delegation that got in. I had heard there were hundreds of boys, maybe 1,000. It turned out that was an underestimation. There were almost 1,500 boys placed into that single building.
We went soon after you to this Southwest Key, to this Walmart where they had walled off they papered over the windows, whatever windows there were, and we tried to get in, and they immediately threatened to arrest us if we dared to walk even into the parking lot.
Yeah, fortunately, the press got in and was able to describe what was going on. I was struck by, they had built 300 bedrooms, little tiny bedrooms. They had proceeded to have 300 boys just months earlier and expanded to 1,500, 5 cots per little bedroom. They were like, oh, well, come see our soccer field. And I'm thinking, how long does it take 1,500 boys to rotate through a soccer field? And I said to the head of Southwest Keys, I said, you expanded so dramatically. What were you lacking? He said, mental health counselors. I said, how many are you short? He said, 90. And I said, this shows there was no planning, no consideration. These are kids traumatized abroad, traumatized en route, ripped away from their parents, traumatized here in the United States of America, and they hadn't planned to be able to hire any sort of mental health counselors. And so this just shows both the incompetence and the callousness of this administration deliberately inflicting harm on children. If it happened anywhere else, Amy, anywhere else in the world, we would be doing resolutions in Congress. We would be taking it to the UN Human Rights Commission. We would be boycotting. We would be saying, never, never would this happen in America. It's happening here right now.
So you've introduced the Stop Cruelty to Migrant Children Act, co-sponsored by the New York Senator Chuck Schumer. What is it, and how are you going to stop President Trump?
Yes, 40 Democrats have sponsored it. We haven't been able to get a single Republican on it. It starts and it says you cannot repel children at the border and leave them stranded. You cannot hold them in inhumane conditions in these holding cells. You have to provide all the basics. You cannot lock them up in an extended period in these influx facilities, which so far have been exempt from the Flores settlement agreement. So whereas Flores says you've got to move into state license within 3 days, many children have been held on an average of 2 months in these influx facilities. It says you get a lawyer and you get a caseworker so that you can actually get your immigration case processed in a timely fashion and assistance how to negotiate this complex system. It facilitates the movement so that you can be in a home and a school and a playground, which is where children belong, not behind barbed wire, as your case is proceeding.
Also talk about your trip to Tijuana.
Yeah, so I wanted to see what this all looked like from the Mexican side of the border. And there are some 30 facilities in Tijuana where refugees are crowded in. Different humanitarian groups have set up houses. I went to 7 of them. One of them was the size of a conference room, a modest-sized conference room. 17 families were living in that one room. 4 sets of bunk beds along the walls, 9 mattresses on the floor, and I just feel that the woman who ran it was such an angel because she was trying to give people space to get off the street where they're so incredibly vulnerable. But these are folks caught up in the metering system, waiting what at that time was about 6 weeks. Now it's longer. And children, unaccompanied children, were not even allowed to get into the metering book. The book, this big registry that's laid out every morning, run theoretically by other refugees. In fact, it's a way for both the Mexican government and the American government to dodge responsibility, because this is probably a direct violation of the Refugee Convention.
So you also visited the Homestead Child Prison in Florida. That's where a lot of the Democratic presidential candidates went because their debate in Miami wasn't far away, and one after another went there and decried this facility. You spoke with a number of children there. Now, this is the place that the former White House Chief of Staff for President Trump, John Kelly, has now joined the board of its owner, Caliborn's board. You mention in your book the conflict of interest here.
Yes, John Kelly, before he went to the administration, was on the board and paid. And within a few weeks of joining the administration, he was advocating for child separation and detention, and which would be, of course, of great profit to this for-profit prison. They are paid on a non-compete contract around $750 to $775 a day per child. It is a vast amount of money, and it is corrupt because it basically incentivizes the imprisonment of children rather than their movement.
Say again, each child $750 a day.
$750 a day. So if they can
and they're stopping kids from going to be with family or other supervisors that family has approved.
They have no incentive, obviously, to have the caseworkers or the field workers to set up the transition to a family setting for these children. This is something ugly and terrible. And then after Kelly left the administration, they put him right back on the board in a paid board position for Caliburn, which is the new incarnation of the company that owns or operates this for-profit prison. Now, right now it has been emptied out. It is hurricane season. I called up the head of Homestead because I had heard from other advocates that just a Category 2 hurricane would put a 6-foot wave through it, asked if they had a plan. They said they did to move the children out in case of a hurricane. I heard from everyone else they didn't. They decided to empty out the facility for now, but they're keeping it ready to put children back in. The contract, in theory, ends in November, and this is a point all Americans should say, shut down this for-profit prison. Do not renew this contract, this corrupt imprisonment of children contract.
Senator Merkley, the book, America is Better Than This, begins with the mother and daughter from Guatemala, Albertina and Jacqueline Contreras. You brought Albertina and Jacqueline to the State of the Union this year. Talk about who they are.
Yes, so they were early victims of child separation, caught totally unaware. Jacqueline, who was 11 years old, watched her mother be led away in shackles. They were separated for 2 months, and it wasn't until a court in June of 2018 shut down child separation that the mother was freed. And then she couldn't find her daughter. She got help, eventually got her daughter released and returned to her. The administration opposed it, tried to block it. She had to go to court. And finally, when her daughter was flown into Tennessee, the whole community group came out and welcomed her. It was on the day of the State of the Union that Jacqueline turned 12 years old. It was her 12th birthday. And she is the most charming young girl, so excited about life forward. And I asked her, if you had anything you could say, if you could talk to the President of the United States, what would you say? She said, Mr. President, end this most cruel law. I thought those were the best way to describe what the administration is doing, this most cruel law. And so I titled the prologue after that.
I want to shift gears and ask you about the fallout from the Trump administration's decision to pull out of the 1987 INF, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, just a few weeks ago. Russian President Vladimir Putin today is ordering his military to prepare for what he called a symmetrical response after the U.S. tested what it said is a non-nuclear cruise missile earlier this week. The U.S. launch was the first test of its kind since the Trump administration withdrew from the INF. Earlier this week, you co-signed a letter urging the Trump administration to ban the deployment of low-yield nuclear missiles and to extend New START treaty. And you introduced a bill earlier this year to prevent a new nuclear arms race. Is that what we're about to see right now?
Amy, when I came out of graduate school, I was planning to work in developing countries around the world on basic health care, et cetera. And I was at the World Bank briefly and was planning to go to Africa. And I was offered a presidential fellowship to work on strategic nuclear policy. And I switched 180 degrees to that issue because at that moment, that was the biggest threat to the planet. And here we are. We had significant advances with the INF treaty that was done during the 1980s while I was working on these issues, SALT and then New START that was implemented a few years ago. And this administration is undoing all of that. There is nothing beneficial to the planet to enter a new nuclear arms race. And under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the nuclear power states have a big responsibility to significantly reduce that arms race, reduce their inventories in partnership with other countries saying we will not become a nuclear power. And so it isn't just about this competition with Russia and the impacts it will have on other countries. It's also about the non-nuclear power states and whether they feel like they are going to refuse to have a nuclear weapon because are the superpowers doing their job? So this is very dangerous stuff, very expensive. There is a plan for the administration over the next 30 years. It'll be over $1 trillion spent on refurbishing nuclear systems without the arms race. With the arms race, how much more will that be? Is this really what we need in the United States? Is this what the world needs? The answer is absolutely not.
Your response to President Trump pulling out of that state visit to Denmark, calling the prime minister, who is a woman, nasty because she called his idea absurd, saying we're long past the time when we can sell populations because she refused to sell Greenland to him?
Yeah. Our international standing has dropped so dramatically because America has a president who is not rational, who is basically cozying up to dictators while insulting and demeaning our allies. There is no sense of soft power leadership from the United States of America. There's no respect left for the President of the United States. So this is deeply damaging to all the things we
It seems that the Republican Party, when they were the minority party in the Senate, could accomplish a lot more than the Democrats can as the minority party. You're in the Senate on what can be done on any number of issues, particularly right now. For example, talking about an assault weapons ban after the latest massacres.
Today in the New York Times, Mitch McConnell has an op-ed in which he says, oh, we would never go to a simple majority. What are the Democrats thinking about pondering getting rid of the filibuster? Terrible idea. We have integrity, the Republicans. We would never do this. This is, of course, a big lie. The truth is the Republicans had two top priorities. One of those was tax cuts for the wealthy. The other was Supreme Court. They changed the rules on both to go from a supermajority to a simple majority. They have done this for their agenda for the powerful. The question is, will Democrats go to a simple majority for an agenda for the people? Are we going to accept the Senate as being a chamber that obstructs the basic vision, we the people vision of the United States of America? And the answer is we cannot allow that to happen. If we're going to take on the issue of climate, if we're going to take on the issue of background checks for guns, if we're going to take on the complete evisceration of the pocketbooks of Americans because of the high price of drugs, we have to overcome this blockade by the powerful in the United States of America against the people.
We just got news that David Koch, the billionaire libertarian who gave more than $1 billion to charitable causes but was better known for using his money to reshape U.S. politics, I'm reading actually from the Wall Street Journal, David Koch has died. The Koch brothers, of course, the famous oil barons, which brings us to the Green New Deal. Senator Sanders formally unveiled his Green New Deal on Thursday, a $16.3 trillion proposal that is significantly larger amount than any plan released by his opponents in the Democratic presidential race, proposing reaching 100% renewable energy by 2030, total decarbonization by 2050. Sanders also plans to transform America's agricultural system by investing in small family-run farms, create 20 million jobs with strong benefits and safety standards, which he says will effectively end unemployment. And he says it'll pay for itself over the next 15 years. What are your thoughts about this as we look at the horror of the fires throughout the Amazon right now? This
is exactly the type of visionary plan we need to have. In 2017, I put together a plan that Bernie Sanders came out and launched it with me. It was called Mission 100. It laid out a transition to 100% renewable energy, the end of fossil fuels in every energy sector by 2050. Many have said, well, yes, but do it even earlier if you possibly can. Absolutely. I've been doing this exercise with people across the country in which I'll have a group breathe in, and I'll do it with you. We'll breathe in, hold, and we'll hold our breath for 3 seconds, and we'll exhale. Ready? Breathe in. Exhale. That air is completely different from the air when I was born. It has 33% more carbon in it. And every one of those carbon molecules is trapping heat. We are destroying the planet in this generation. It has huge impacts. We must aggressively transition to renewables. Bernie Sanders has laid out a really aggressive plan. I applaud him. 4 years ago, we didn't even talk about climate in the presidential debates, which I was so frustrated about. And I want to say thank you to Governor Inslee, who has exited the presidential race, but made climate what he talked about on every occasion, giving great service to America. Do you condemn the DNC's decision not to allow a climate-only debate? So there is they haven't completely decided yet. They're going to have another vote. I'm encouraging them absolutely hold a climate debate. This is going to be, because first it is the issue threatening our planet. Can human civilization cope with how fast we're changing the planet and destroying the ecosystems? And by the way, this is not an urban issue or a rural issue. This is an everyone issue. The biggest effects right away in terms of Americans, it is farming, it is fishing, it is forestry. foundation pillars for the rural economy, which was why we need to engage with rural America. They're feeling the impact, but they're listening to Fox News say there's nothing going on. We have to get the truth and the partnership with rural America.
Senator Merkley, you were the first Democratic senator to endorse Bernie Sanders in 2016. Will you be endorsing him again?
I'm going to wait quite a while on the endorsement front. I really applaud so many people getting into this race and bringing so many ideas to bear. I think it's a very healthy discussion. It's going to sort itself out to a much smaller field here shortly, but I love many of these individuals who are running and bringing their ideas and thoughts to bear.
You called for President Trump's resignation in 2017 over the number of women who had said he sexually assaulted them. Are you continuing to call for that, and do you support his impeachment?
I do support his impeachment. So before, if you had asked me before the Mueller report, I would have said it depends on what the Mueller report says. What does the Mueller report say? I went to the floor and laid out the 4 cases of obstruction of justice in which the president, and there are 3 things that have to happen. You have to have an obstructive act, you have to have a nexus to a court proceeding, a connection to a court proceeding, and you have to have intent. And he lays out in his report, here is the issue, here is the evidence, here is the connection, here is the intent, and says strong evidence in 4 cases on all 3 points. So my first political act was when Vice President to Nixon, Spiro Agnew, was convicted of bribery, and his penalty of taking $100,000 in bribes, $10,000. And I'm like, oh, this is justice for the powerful in America. You keep 90% of your ill-gotten proceeds. What happened to equal justice under law? Those 4 words carved into the facade of the Supreme Court above the front doors. And so I wrote a letter to the local newspaper. I was a junior in high school. They published it. And I think about this all the time. This president has substantial evidence of major felony crime, and no one will hold him accountable except the House of Representatives. If the House of Representatives turns away, then they are participating in the destruction of the principle of equal justice under law. They have to act.
Senator Jeff Merkley, I want to thank you very much for being with us, Democratic senator from Oregon and new author. His first book is just out. It's titled, America is Better Than This, Trump's War Against Migrant Families. When we come back, the Amazon. There's a meme going around right now. It's gone viral online. It says, the wrong Amazon is burning, the wrong ice is melting. Stay with us.